Welcome to the latest of our research seminars in health and social work. Particularly warm welcome if you are from an outside agency. This is a break from our normal pattern in that we have invited an outside speaker to come and take this afternoon's seminar. This is Rachel Fearnley. She will probably, no doubt, tell you more about herself, but if I can just introduce you to her. Rachel is a qualified social worker, but she works independently, providing advice and consultancy in the general field of support for people who have relatives who are approaching the end of their lives. So in the field of terminal care. And the particular specialism is in creating communities of support for young people who have a close relative, has a parent who is in a terminal state. And I believe you're particularly going to talk today about students and how to support students who are in these kind of circumstances. So I'm going to hand you over to Rachel now, and she can tell you far more accurately about yourself than I can. So over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Graham. Thank you for inviting me along today. And I understand that it's sort of I'm a bit of a change from the normal pattern because I'm going to talk a little bit about my research, but also going to be having quite hopefully an interactive session talking about how as a university you can support students. Now I apologise, my background is children and families, and my research was around children and families when their parents are at the end of life. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. But a lot of the findings that I'll be talking about are very much can be swapped over and are in parallel with students. And so although I might keep talking about children and parents, please forgive me, it is also very much often applicable to students as well. And again, although I'm talking about students and parental illness, it's equally applicable to any other significant person in the student's life. But because of my background, I do tend to be a bit tunnel focused in terms of thinking about parents. Particularly pleased to be able to come along today because actually this is National Week of Dying Awareness. And although there's a lot of out in the media about there's Mental Health Awareness Week this week, there's Epilepsy Awareness Week this week, there's Celiac Awareness Week this week, and there is also Dying Awareness, but I think that's sort of getting down on the agenda quite a bit, so it's really good to be here to be able to actually talk about something, but an area that I'm really passionate about and which I feel very strongly about. So Dying Awareness Week, as I say, up and down the country this week there are a lot of events going on all over, some really big ones, big conferences, and then small things with people just doing death cafes and things. Lots of people talking about death and dying, which makes it really great. But the theme this year for Dying Awareness Week is what can you do in your community? And that was sort of prompting me to sort of invite myself to see if I could come along to talk this week about what we can do for the students and the community of students, and thinking clearly about how we can support them when somebody is dying or has died, and looking at the impact that might have on them. So start with what is community, and just thinking about the communities that you belong to, the different ones. So for me, I can think of a lot of different communities I'm involved with. I belong to the Twitter community. I might not know any of the people who are following me, I might never meet them, interact very rarely with them, but there's also other communities that I'm involved with. I belong to a knitting group that we meet regularly, and so I'm very close friends with the people who belong there. So there's lots of different communities, and I'm sure that you can think of all sorts of different, many communities that you belong to. And the students here, hopefully, will feel that they belong to a community within the university themselves. But for some students, it may well be that actually they belong to a different sub-community, and that's the one where their parent or significant carer has a life-limited illness or has died. And for those students, they're the ones that we really want to focus on today. Just looking at the statistics that are out there, and this is for children under the age of 18, but approximately 23,600 parents die each year in the UK. approximately 41,000 children are bereaved of a parent. And the one that I really gets me every time I think about it, approximately 111 children will experience the death of a parent in the UK every day, which I think is really quite a big number of children. And if you then think about that in terms of how many children are in school who have been bereaved, and then of course following on to that, how many young people are in university who have been bereaved. Big numbers. And 1 in 5 children and young people have experienced the death of a parent or a sibling in their lives. All these figures are approximate because we don't keep figures about children and death. It's something that I can't quite understand. We keep statistics about everything. I'm sure if I phoned Nottingham Council, they could tell me how many parking fines they've given out in the last 6 months, and could give statistics for all sorts of different things. When it comes to children and death, we don't keep them. So these are all approximate figures. And even more, sort of for me, we have absolutely no idea how many children are currently living with a parent who has a life-limiting illness. We have statistics for how many people are diagnosed each year with specific illnesses, and so we can sort of begin to think about and extrapolate how many children that may well be. And I think it's probably huge numbers of children and young people who are living in this situation. So, a lovely place to be. This was my PhD, so a little bit of background about me. As Graham said, I'm a qualified social worker. Worked with children and families for lots of years. I'm not going to mention how many. But latterly I managed a Bernardo's Family Support Service. It was very preventative work. Fabulous job, I loved it. Regularly when I was going out to meet with families, it was often the mums, the mothers who I was really working with. Time and time again, they were talking about how they were, the issues that they were presenting with and why we'd be involved. And quite often they talked about how as young people had significant bereavement and sort of coped and got on with it and were okay. And then when they'd had their children, lots of different issues had come back to them, and they related very much to memories and recall of the bereavement that they'd had. And that just got me really interested and really curious, and so on the back of that I started looking at doing more work and ended up doing my PhD, which was around children's experiences when a parent's at the end of life and dying. What I really wanted with the research was for it to be prospective. I wanted it to be with interviewing children. And I suppose I've got this really naive thing that I thought I could just go along and yes, I've gone through all the ethics, and I passed the ethics, the NHS ethics with no problem at all. Got me a bit of paper to say, yes, I'm bona fide, I can go and do research. And so off I went, thinking I can go now and interview children and hear their voices, because what I really wanted, what I'm passionate about, is the children's voice, because they're often ignored, they're often isolated, they're not represented in terms of statistics or anything else. I wanted to hear the children's voice. So I got me a bit of paper and thought, here goes, this is it, ha-ha. And I hit numerous barriers from gatekeepers in terms of not letting me actually work with young people. They said that a lot of the reasons were that the children would be too upset talking to me, and that it would cause too much angst for them. Lots of different reasons. So I had to then refocus what my research was going to be, and it became retrospective, and I was able to interview some young people who had been bereaved, but also professionals as well, to be able to get their voice, get a rounded voice. And subsequently, as I was talking to the professionals particularly, and sort of mentioning about the barriers and the gatekeepers, and a lot of them said the children wouldn't have been upset talking to me. Actually being able to talk to somebody who's interested and who's going to give them a bit of time and not be judgmental and just listen and be interested in their story. A lot of the professionals said they'd have really enjoyed that, they'd have appreciated that, but that's how it went. So that was my PhD. Some of the key findings that we found from it: communication and information sharing. The children that I did speak to, all of them said about the importance of communication and the importance of having the information that they wanted to the extent that they wanted. And within that, I met a number of people. One of them was sort of at one end of the continuum. in terms of she'd been given information throughout about her grandfather who was dying. And she was a very eloquent, young, confident young girl, and she talked about how it had been really hard. She knew what was happening, she'd been totally informed. And she said, although at the time when he died, and then subsequently she said, I miss him terribly, and she'd got lovely memories of Grandad. But she said, I knew what was happening, and so it was okay. And I knew that the worst was going to happen, but I was prepared for it because I'd been informed. And although she was struggling, she was clearly missing Grandad, she was also actually very articulate and seemed to have a very positive way of coping and managing with what was happening in her life. And that was compared with another young person I met who hadn't been told anything about her mum dying, up to the point of when mum was actually in hospital dying, you know, literally the day that she died. This young person hadn't been told anything. And the issues that she had, she was a young adult when I met her. She'd had a raft of different issues which she put down clearly to the fact of what had happened with her mum, and she hadn't had time to process what was going to be happening, and that she was able to say goodbye to her mum and do things. She'd got huge guilt because of things that she'd done or not done in relation to her mum. So a lot of the information that was coming out for my research was about communication and information sharing, and that children actually do want to know what's happening to the extent that they can, that they feel safe, that they feel they want to know. So not necessarily giving them everything, but asking them, how much do you want to know? What do you know, we know that some mum's poorly or dad's poorly, how much do you want to know about this? Managing the experience, that was a big issue as well for children in terms of how they coped. Going into school on a day-to-day basis when they've got all these issues that they were focusing on, and you know, they were probably physically in school, but mentally and emotionally they were somewhere far away from. And the sometimes lack of support and a lack of help that they were getting from school, lack of recognition that actually, if they were staring out of the window or if they were staring into space and not sort of focusing on their maths or whatever, there was actually probably a really good reason for it. But it was expected that they would be doing the maths and would be doing their English and they needed focusing. And it was just too emotionally draining for them actually to be doing that. And transitions. And I think transitions is an important one when we're thinking about the students as well, because all the transitions that students have when they come into university, and the differences and the changes and the whole new thing of being in a completely different environment from school. But for the children, young people I met, transitions were a big thing. The transitions from living with a parent who was healthy to living with a parent who might die was a massive big transition for them, and different things that they had to cope with. So some of the quotes that I got from, I've just picked out some that I think are salient for today. So like for this healthcare professional, it's just really hard, and it's a very scary place for children to be living in it and to be living through what's happening. And I think for here it's about thinking about students again, and actually it can be a very scary place, particularly when they're not at home. If the students are away from home, studying away from home, then for them it can be a very difficult thing, scary place, because they don't know what's happening. We'll be revisiting that again in a minute. Another healthcare professional that I met, the pain is intense following the death, but the worst has happened, and now everyone's task is to find a way through it. Whereas when children are still facing the death of a parent, there's so much that's uncertain, difficult to resolve because things are on hold. And likewise, one young person that I met was saying about when her mum was dying, she said it was just everything was random, were her words. She said we didn't know what was happening, and we couldn't go to the classes the after-school classes that she used to go to, and everything that she really knew about and enjoyed doing, meeting with her friends, didn't happen because it was all on hold. She didn't know when mum was going to die. She knew that she was, but she didn't know when it was going to be. Would it be next month, 3 months' time? When would it be? So everything for this young person is classed, she said, was random. But what she said was after her mum had died, it was very painful, it was very hard for her, but actually suddenly they'd got a routine back. They knew what had happened, the worst thing had happened, and now they could start to get on and build their lives and carry on because of the uncertainty had gone. which I think was very interesting for them, that, you know, they'd lived through a long period of the illness, and although it was difficult after one had died, they could actually then start getting on and building up again. So that, to me, begs the question about the fact that, for me, I think the pre-death period and the work around that is so important. To be able to support the uncertainty and the unknown. And Luke, who I met, you just left in this confusing place. And I think for a lot of children and young people, that's very true. And if we go back to, sort of about communication, if children aren't being spoken to, aren't being given information, they are going to be in a confusing place because they don't know what's happening. They can see things, and one of the things with children is, you know, they will see what's happening. They'll see that their parents are looking more ill, that they're taking time off work, that they are off sick, that they're looking different. But if they're not given information, they will put two and two together and not make four, and make something completely different, and left in a confusing place of being sort of almost forgotten and isolated. And this young person, I just didn't fit in with other people my age. And again, relating this back to students at university, it could well be very difficult for them, because I'm thinking about students who are sort of probably in the early stages of their university life, trying to make friends, trying to sort of manage the transitions into this life of university, and probably not having made close bonds with friends, close friendships, and then not fitting in because they don't want to be necessarily going out every night or doing whatever students do these days, because they're focusing on ringing home or checking out how the person is that's at home with them. Again, in terms of the young people I met, a lot of them said that actually, you know, the general chitter-chatter in school about what happened on Coronation Street last night, or who was going out with who, or whatever, it suddenly became irrelevant. They weren't bothered about what had happened to whoever. I don't know what Coronation Street, so forgive me, but whoever's in Coro, they don't know what's happening about the story. And they're not bothered, because they've got their own drama going on in their lives right now that they're living out. But they can't talk to their friends about that, because their friends don't understand. And this young person who I met, one of her other comments was that I met her at a support group for bereaved children, and she was saying how lovely it was to be able to come into the group, because everybody in the group understood, and everybody else knew what was happening, and they'd been in a similar place. But when I went into school, she's like, I put a smile on my face, and I pretended I was happy, and she changed her voice and changed her whole persona. She was telling me, and I pretend that I'm happy and I'm okay. So she was clearly wearing a mask while she was there and pretending that she was somebody that she wasn't, because her friends just didn't understand, or probably didn't want to understand. Death and dying is a taboo subject. We don't talk about it. So for her, it was just feeling different. And Chowns, this is written quite some time ago now, by Gillian Chowns. And I think the interesting bit for me is about that their future is uncertain. And again, relating back to students at university, their future is uncertain. The future is uncertain anyway because of, again, this course and the studying and how they're progressing. But then if they've got this on top as well that they're trying to cope with and trying to manage, it becomes very different for them and very difficult. The future is uncertain. Do I carry on with my studies? Do I pack in and go home or stop my studies? I know slightly different circumstances, but I was at college when my mum died suddenly, and my instant thought was that I'd stop. I just took it for granted I'd stop college and stay at home at 16, 17 to look after my dad. There was no question of that. But in my mind, or my logical mind at that time, it was that's it, that's the end of me going to college and doing what I want to do. Because I was stuck at home. And possibly for students in university, that's the same feeling of, you know, the being torn between I want to be at home, looking after the person, but I also want to be here as well. And we'll go back to that in a minute. So just what research tells us in general about young people and death and dying. Children who have been bereaved certainly are far more likely to visit their GP than their peers. There's a lot of research around that. And their physical and mental health is at risk of being compromised because of what's happening. For a lot of young people, of course, becoming a young carer is a big issue. And sometimes that's because almost out of choice, they want to do that because they feel that it's something that they're contributing, they're being part of, and it's their way of helping out. But it also, for a lot of young people, becoming a young carer isn't an option, and it's something that happens to them. And I think there are statistics that young carers on average lose 1 term a year from school because of their caring role, which can have a massive impact on them in terms of their education, of course, but also in terms of being part of that community of school and being with their friends and peers. Family life is disrupted. Everything that was normal about family life suddenly stops being normal. Again, from my research that I was speaking to, said that the whole conversation is always on the illness, nothing else. It's about if the weather's affecting it, if the cold is affecting it, if the hot's affecting it, if the rain's affecting it, when the next hospital appointment is, when the next medical crisis is, when anybody rings up, it's always how's the person who's poorly, not anything else about family life. One person said, suddenly you can't just go off to the seaside for the day and have fish and chips on the pier. Suddenly you have to be thinking about, well, actually, if we're going off to the seaside, we need to take this, we need to take that, we need to plan for that. So a lot of disruption to family life. And again, back to communication to the children. If they're not being told about what's happening, then that can be very strange and very uncomfortable and a difficult place for them. Criminal activity. I went to a project in Scotland to talk to the workers there. And they worked with young people in a youth offending team. And prior to my visit, they'd just done a very unscientific straw poll of all the young people they were working with, and found that 98% of the young people they were currently working with had experienced a significant bereavement. And even more alarming, prior to death, they'd not been involved in criminal activity. So, it was totally unscientific. It was just a straw poll that they'd done, looking at the records of the young people they were working with. But I think that's a really major thing to think about in terms of young people and the impact of death and dying and bereavement on them. And of course, education. Education can be really disruptive because of what's happening. For some children, suddenly, school is just totally irrelevant. What's the point of going? What's the point of anything? Because all I can think about at the moment is what's happening here and now with my family in this major crisis in my life, and actually doing GCSEs and SACs and goodness knows what else. What's the point? All I'm bothered about is what's happening at home. For some children, young people, actually education becomes really important, and school becomes that safe normality for them, and something that they can hang on to in terms of normality and where they can go and forget about what's happening and they can focus on destiny and life. We talked about communication earlier. Communication. Euphemisms. I love euphemisms, and I'll tell you some examples of why I love them in a minute. But give me some euphemisms for death and dying. What do we say?
So-and-so's past. That one really gets on my nerves.
Yes.
Yeah.
Past? What do you mean? What do you mean with past?
They passed the death exam.
Any other euphemisms that we use? One of my favourites, well, it's not a favourite, it's one of my bugbears, is that somebody's gone to sleep.
It's really confusing.
It's very, very confusing. And again, relating back to my research, one young person I met, he'd having real problems, difficulties. He hadn't slept for 2 years, not slept through. And he insisted on sleeping in his parents' room, and every night without fail, he would wake them up at least twice during the night. He'd either want a drink, he asked him for a drink, he needed to go to the laboratory, so that's for that. Every night without fail for 2 years, and at the end he was sort of getting really to the wit's end, and ended up going for some support from the hospice. And it transpired that his grandmother had died, and when she died, they told him she'd gone to sleep. And for 2 years he didn't sleep. Until he had some support with the counselling through the hospice, and was actually able to then work out what was meant. Which I think is a very sad story, but it illustrates really well how the language that we use can be so easily misunderstood. But there's also, for me, another thing, that if somebody, when we go to sleep, what happens then? Hopefully, we wake up. So if somebody has died, you know, why a child, a young person, will probably logically think, well, go and wake them up now.
Yeah.
You know, it's time they woke up. Or equally, again, it's sort of something that probably people within the nursing, caring, sort of nursing roles wouldn't probably ever think of. But if somebody's in the hospital and they are ill and they're resting, and then their child bounds in to see them, and you know, actually it would be really nice if they could just rest and sleep, but then the child's wake up, we don't want you to go to sleep. That could also impact on them, couldn't it? On the health of or on the state of the person who's ill. You know, constantly woken up by the child so they don't go to sleep. What are the other ones? What about gone to heaven?
With the angel.
Again, I heard a story of a child on an aeroplane, I think they were going to Spain or somewhere, and at the top of their voice on the aeroplane said, "Oh, we're going to meet Grandad in heaven," which is not the best thing you want to hear when you're on the flight. Holidays. What does that child do that I don't know? It's very confusing. Another one for me is saying that somebody's a star in heaven. And a lot of people will find comfort in that because of their religious beliefs. But actually, that's fine. What happens when it's a cloudy night? And you look out for your star and it's not there? Then you're sort of almost like a double bereavement because suddenly the person that was up there is no longer. One that I read about in America, which I really like, is a child who, and it's not to do with, not directly to do with death and dying, but the child stopped eating their cornflakes. Just point blank refused. One day, that was it. They were not going to eat the cornflakes, they would not have them. And when their parents sort of dug a bit around it, they had heard on the news that there was a serial killer. Oh. Which I think that's a really fabulous one. But it's language, I think, how we use language is so important. And I think they realised they were told what the difference between the cereal and a cereal, possibly. So looking at potential risks to university students and sort of thinking about the things that we've talked about already, that I've talked about, because I do have a habit of gabbling on, I apologise. Some of the risks just for students. Do those resonate? Do you see that there probably are those issues that might happen for them? I think some of the, sorry, can you explain the social mobility? Social mobility, just in terms of not being able to move on. If they don't finish the studies, then they're not being able to, you know, they can't graduate, they can't then get a job and move on to somewhere else. It can be impeding for them in terms of their future and their development. Concentration, you know, as I said about the children staring out of the window or staring into space, which often happens, that could well be a case for students as well. That they're not, and sometimes I know that students probably are thinking about other things. We've all been there, they were thinking about Friday night and where we're going and stuff, but for a lot of students in this case, it might be that actually they're just thinking about what's going on at home. For some, feeling torn, wanting to be at university, wanting to carry on with the studies and wanting to do what they're doing, but also at the same time wanting to be at home, and that feeling of being somewhere else. guilt of being at university. I shouldn't be here, I should be at home, I shouldn't be doing this, because I'm actually enjoying this, I shouldn't be doing it.
I think you feel that as a torture and stuff.
Yeah. It is a feeling that you can have, isn't it, in terms of just, I shouldn't be here doing something that I'm enjoying or that is going to enhance my development. The question, might it be different for male students as opposed to female students who are in this situation? Might there be a difference for them?
Maybe harder to talk to people.
For the males.
I think also, I've got no evidence for this, I'm just thinking about it, but when you're thinking about people having time off from university, that's for caring responsibilities at home, you might think that that was more common amongst female students than male students. I don't know if that is the case, but you would think that that was likely to be the case.
You sort of go to the culture or gender thing, isn't
Yes.
it, of that, and also certainly of men keeping things to themselves, which we know men are very are more prone to keep things inside and not share, either with colleagues or with friends or with family. So,
is there also a difference depending on religious beliefs and cultural norms? Like, or whether that's actually a big difference in the gender differences?
I think it probably is, yeah, because of the, like you say, what's expected of people, and the again that's the very close-knit families where it is expected that the young people are there to support. It could have a huge detrimental effect there. And I think, I mean, research shows back to the male and female that boys do tend to externalise more than girls internalise. But actually there is some more research now saying that actually girls will use external things to support them to cope. So excessive alcohol, drugs, misuse, things to be able to help cope and mask the pain, what I call a sticking plaster, just to get through that pain. So potential impact on the students' mental health in particular, and at the start of this session I mentioned that it's a mental health week as well, and I think so it's quite that we can put the two together. Not an exhaustive list, there are probably lots of other things that you can think of that might happen for students, but certainly in terms of things that they may be presenting with to you as a tutor, or in terms of student support they may be going to because of depression. And actually looking at, well, what is the reason behind that? Sort of unpicking a bit of their depression, what is causing it, and is it about something that they're actually living with somebody who's dying, or that they're in that situation. Self-harming. Is that an issue that you come across in university? Or that you're aware of? Yeah. Yes and no's.
Does anorexia come under that?
Definitely. I know whether it certainly comes under somewhere, doesn't it? Because that's a big one. Yeah. And identity in terms of how you're presenting as well, isn't it? It's all linked to how you feel you are, who you are. And which again I suppose comes in with identity. Social isolation. That could be a big one, because if your friends don't understand, and going back to what we were saying about from my findings, if your friends don't understand, and also don't talk about it. It's not a subject that we talk about, is it? You know, there's still the thing about people actually physically crossing over the road to avoid somebody, and I think that is still very much the case, that sometimes we will try and avoid, and actually sometimes it's difficult. I mean, a personal experience recently was with somebody that we know who's in a similar situation. I had to force myself to go and say, right, I'm going to go and talk to them, even though for me it's quite, I talk about it all day long, but actually having to go and do it is a different thing. And thinking, no, we can't leave this elephant in the room, we've got to go and talk about it.
There's also something I think about the other person thinking, well, I won't mention it, I'll give them a rest, because if I don't mention it, they'll forget about it for a while.
Yeah.
And of course you don't.
No.
It's just there.
Yeah.
You never forget it,
Yeah.
even if you're not talking about it.
Yeah. And if we don't talk about it, then, like you say, they'll forget about it. But also, I don't want to upset them.
Yeah. Yes.
What if I say something and they start getting upset? How am I going to cope with that? And how am I going to manage that situation when somebody else is getting upset? Because we don't do that. So we'll let it go and we'll just carry on as normal, pretend everything's okay. Which then leads much more to being isolated or potentially feeling isolated. And then the impact of that on the student in terms of their studies, how might that impact on them? Thinking on the next line, being very particular about social work students on placement and thinking about what might happen for specifically when they're on placement, because when they're in the university and they're attending lectures and things, they are within some communities, they're within the communities with their peers, they're in the university community. But when they're out on placement, it could well be a very different scenario, because they're out away from university, quite isolated and sort of separated from it potentially, in a new environment where they've got to get used to, and all the things that from placement, and all the social workers amongst us probably remember placements and sort of sometimes feeling that it wasn't, necessarily comfortable at times, because it was different, and you were the student and you were going to make mistakes and you were going to look silly in front of people. So there are issues in terms of for them feeling isolated, again not completing the course, which has huge ramifications for them. But an interesting one for me is about work allocation when people are on placement. What if they are inadvertently given a case that is similar circumstances, or that they're asked to work with somebody where there's been a bereavement? That could have a big impact on how they cope, how they feel. Could it? Might that affect them?
We once placed a social work student in an adult team, and just prior to starting placement, the student informed us that their grandfather had died, and it was an older adult team at the time, and expressed an interest that if he would go to that placement, that he would have an opportunity because of that reason.
But clearly that was a student who had some ability or confidence to be able to say, well actually, or an insight to say, well actually this is going to affect me and I'd rather not.
I think one of the things about the death of a grandparent as well is that it's sort of considered normal, which it is, because it's an ageing process, isn't it? So with your person, yes, I mean they asked to move, but in fact people might have thought, well, a grandparent, an elderly person, death is natural and normal. Your person should actually be able to get over that, perhaps more easily than the death of a parent, which is more unnatural.
Yeah.
But sometimes today, grandparents are significant parents.
Yes, of course they are. I guess so. Yeah.
I think what you're saying is in terms of that we, as a society, we say, oh, it's normal that, so it's okay, then they'll be okay to, they can go and do that placement because it's normal, get on with it. Whereas, as Barry says, for some people, grandparents, and sometimes grandparents are the first death that young people experience, and so then how do you manage that and finding your way through that can be really difficult. I think the flip side for me in terms of for students on placement is the potential that, and then actually they start saying, almost colluding with the person that they're working with who's in a similar situation, and saying, oh, I know what it's like because I've done that, and I did this and this to help, and actually cross the professional boundary from social work student to being somebody who's almost sort of not a professional friend, but a friend, and I know what it's like. Yeah, when I find it helpful to go out on a Friday night and drown a few pints or whatever, and not give helpful support and actually cross the boundaries.
I think the other thing that's probably on placement is when actually they encounter things that are not death, present very similar for people they're working with. A couple of years ago, in the team that I work as a social worker, we had a ridiculous number of parents who got sent to prison for lengthy periods of time. And actually, one of my social workers discovered that actually the child didn't know that their parent had gone to prison, and they'd just been told that they were poorly, so they couldn't come to contact. I was like, no, you can't say that. They need to know that their parent's in prison, and actually they're not coming out. They've been given like 6 years. They're not going to see them for 3 years at least. And I think that for the child that presented in, I mean, it wasn't an issue particularly for that social worker, but it could be if you'd experienced bereavement.
Yes.
That then when you see a child who's experienced something like that, for the child actually, prison or death, if you're only 4 or 5, is probably not a great deal of difference in terms of your lived experience at that time.
Yeah.
And I think that they could, so they may not actually see it coming because it might not be death. Do you know what I mean? It may not be that presents with the bereavement, because it's still a bereavement, isn't it?
It is.
And lots of things like coming into care or parents just disappearing, those sorts of things could create very, very similar lived experiences for children that the social work student has to face, which will rekindle for them their own feelings that looked very similar.
And then how do they transfer that into their practice?
Yeah.
You know, do they then start colluding with the family in terms of, we won't say that actually dad's gone away and he's in prison, and not be truthful? Or do they then say, well, actually, you should be doing this, but how do they say that?
Yeah. Those children, both parents went to prison for different reasons, within about 6 weeks of each other. So they literally lost both parents to lengthy prison sentences within several weeks of each other. And they were only 5 and 7, I think, the children with autism. They really didn't understand what they'd been told.
And how that's handled for the social worker.
They were very confused.
Well, the social worker.
Well, the social worker was very confused. I mean, the social worker told them that they were ill. But so we had to go in and do a big piece of work with them that actually, no, they're not ill. They're in prison.
They're in prison.
Yeah.
So I think what sort of I'm trying to pull out here is that for students on placement, we're having to be mindful that there could be big implications for them. Students generally in university, but I think particularly for being on placement. Which brings me on to a family that I would like to just introduce to you. A bit of publicity here. I've just written a book, and I'm not really just here just to sell my book. There is a reason for it, and it does tie in, honestly. This is not just a good excuse to promote it. Within my work I've been trying very much about raising awareness about this as an issue. And sometimes with more success than others. I've lost count of the number of people I've been to try and talk to, people, MPs, people in quite high up in the church I've been to people within the health service, you name it, I've tried it. I've tried to get this on the agenda and struggled in terms of some of it. So what I decided in the end was, for me, I work quite simplistically, and if it's not working this way, then let's do it a different way. And so I decided to write a novel, which is very much about a family where mum is diagnosed with a life-limiting illness. Yes, I've written it because I want people to buy it and read it and enjoy it, but I also want people to read it and think, is that really the case? And actually question, because throughout the storyline there are different issues for the 3 children in the book, and for the family as well. Including the 18-year-old who has gone just at university, and I'm going to introduce her in a minute, and we're going to do a few sort of thinking about some of the implications for her. I've self-published it, so I asked people that I didn't really know to read it for me, to proofread it for clearly, because you read it, and you can't see. And one of the people who proofread it for me, very kindly read it, rang me and said, well, yeah, I'm really enjoying it, but some of those issues, is that real? Will that really be happening? I think you need to tone it down a bit in some of the parts, because it's not true. And I had to explain to them that actually, yes, a lot of this is based on research, it's based on It's not based on a family, but it's based on a accumulation of different families, different things that might happen. And yes, all these things that are in the book could well happen. And when I put the telephone down from speaking to her, I've made somebody think. They've already started questioning, is this really going to happen to families? So I was quite happy with the results of that. So in the family, we've got Mum, who is the one who becomes ill and diagnosed with a life-limiting illness. And husband, Nathan, and then 3 children, and it's Rebecca that I want to focus on. So I'm going to read a 3 excerpts from the book. It's very, very brief ones about Rebecca, and would like you to think about what the issues could be for her in these different scenarios. So in the first one, what happens is, in terms of Mum finding out that she's ill, it's just after Christmas that she finds out, just coinciding with Rebecca going back to university. It's the first year away from home. When she started in September, she really struggled. She was very homesick. She didn't settle very well at all. She's now had a few weeks at home for Christmas. She's very anxious. She's going back the next day to university. She knows that something's wrong, but she doesn't know what. So she challenges her father about it. Dad coughed to clear his throat and then reached over to hold my hand. My stomach somersaulted as I knew he was going to tell me what was happening. Did I really want to hear this? Or was I ready to hear something awful? It's absolutely nothing to worry about, but Mum has been a bit under the weather recently. She's had some tests and she's ill. But it really is nothing to worry about. And by the time you're home for Easter, everything will be back to normal. What is it, Dad? What's wrong? I asked as tears streamed down my face. I could taste a salty mixture on my lips, and in that moment felt as though my world had been turned upside down. But my upset very quickly turned to anger. You weren't going to tell me, were you? I shouted at him. You were just going to let me go back and not bother to tell me, like I'm not that important and it doesn't matter. Dad tried to put his arm round my shoulder, but I shrugged him away. My mind was racing. I needed information, but at the same time I didn't want to know any more. I tried to calm myself and asked again in a more controlled way, what is it, Dad? What's wrong with Mum? What could be the issues for Rebecca as she prepares to go back to university? What might be some of the things that she's facing? And what, I suppose also, what might be some of the things as staff that you might be facing as she comes back?
The thing that came out of that for me was those awful weasel words, there's nothing to worry about. That's the thing that always going to make you worry more than anything, isn't it? There's nothing to worry about. So that's what makes her worry more.
So how might that impact on her coming back to university the next day? She's coming back.
She was experiencing homesickness internally, amplify those feelings.
Yeah.
Feeling more perhaps isolated, going back home because she got shared experience.
There's a first year wobble after Christmas holidays anyway, because it's the first time students will have been back.
Right.
And then have settled back in, seen their old chums, been back in their family, had some home cooking, had the washing done. And it's well known that millions of them don't want to come back.
Right.
My own son didn't.
Mm.
What we should do. She'd be having that first year wobble anyway, and then to have this, it would have put more anxiety, more self-doubt, maybe. And what you said about there's nothing to worry about, it's kind of setting up false expectations. So she will, when she comes back at Easter, and perhaps they do say, well, Mum is a little more ill than we thought she was. She's going to be angry again. Why did you lie to me? And thinking that everything is going to be okay, and then finding, well, no, it isn't.
Is she going to have to concentrate during the lectures? What's she going to be thinking about?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different issues for her, aren't there, in terms of not wanting to be there, not wanting to be back, desperately not wanting to be, just thinking constantly about what's happening at home, and really the heart and the head, want to be somewhere else other than where they are. So I'm going to fast forward a bit now. It's April, and she's coming home for the weekend. And at the start of it, the family are sitting down having a takeaway meal, and Rebecca's reflecting on this. For a brief period, we're doing really normal, mundane stuff that means so much to each of us, and which acted as a reminder of small chunks of life that represented our family and who we were. Then later on, she's back on the train going back to university after the weekend she's had at home. But now we were facing the biggest crisis ever, and I felt a coward because I was running back to university. I should have been at home with Mum. She needed me to help her, to support her, looking after Titch, that's the little 6-year-old, and Daniel, the 14-year-old brother. I wasn't sure what I could do in reality to help, but not being at home made me feel very inadequate. With every passing minute, the train was taking me away from where I should be. There was a conspiracy with it, and this awful crisis that was unfolding before our very eyes. The rhythmic rattling of the train became embedded in my head, the noise in tune with the words that were being repeated over and over in my mind. Why my mum? Why my mum? Why my mum? When she gets back to university, she has an interview and actually successfully secures a part-time job in a cafe. But again, what might the issues be? So it's, 3-4 months since she found out that her mum was ill. She's been home, seen what's happening with the family. They've had done some mundane, normal stuff, like having a takeaway, which was really important for her, and help sort of fix back with what family life was like. So what might the issues be now for her?
I guess a feeling of guilt. So it appeared like she's moving on, going back to university. Now she can see that actually mum is would need my help.
I'm not assuming that we don't know that anything we can about what information she's got. She might also still not be getting real factual information. I mean, we obviously she might that might that might worry her more, might it, having the real information about how their mum's got to live, for instance. But if she didn't have it, that would make her feel more conflicted and wanting to know but not wanting to know.
And thinking back to when she was going back after Christmas and they weren't going to tell her until she actually prized it out of Dad what was happening. So she's probably still got that in the back of her mind as well, that how truthful are they being? Are they protecting me in the best possible, kindest way? They're trying to protect me and keep me from worrying about this. But actually, if they are, what's really happened?
Is she preoccupied with thinking about it and telling the truth? Or is she now thinking a realisation of what is actually happening? And that's something
And either way, whichever scenario it is, how's that then going to impact when she comes back to her studies? I mean, April, will there be exams for her? Will there be end of year things coming up that she's got to be, assignments and things that she's got to be concentrating on? And so how will all that be impacting on? And what we're going to do in a minute is actually start thinking about how probably things that we could do to help support. And now it's September, and she started her second year. She's got through the first year, and she's still working in the cafe. She's just done some extra shifts because her colleague's been away on holiday, and so she's had a week being in charge of the cafe. And Dave, the manager, has asked her out for a drink. I told him about Mum, how Mum was and how difficult things were for all of us, trying to cope living with it. It is what the illness is called. I found myself telling him about my fears and worries about the future, and my feelings had been torn. In one respect, I want to be at home to care for her, but also I was quite glad that I was away from all the problems. Being at university was almost an escape for me. I was able to get on with my life, and at times almost forget about Mum. being some distance from all that was happening meant I could wrap myself in some delusional belief that everything was okay. I suppose part of my brain was protecting me from having to fully face what was happening. When I said this today, if you seem to understand and appear to genuinely care about my situation. So she's moved on a bit. What's happening now for what could be the issues?
She's still feeling guilty. She's feeling guilty that she's coping.
Yes.
Which is sad.
And she may be getting into this relationship because the person is sympathetic and seeming to be understanding without it necessarily. I mean, I'm not saying voodoo. How do you know whether this is going to be the right relationship for her? But she's responding to somebody being sympathetic and understanding.
So would that indicate a certain level of vulnerability? That actually
Yes.
she could be sort of picking up on somebody who was showing us some giving us some time and sort of making a fuss of her. Could that then lead to somewhere?
Well, it could do, but also, I mean, I think, you know, she's human, isn't she? So she needs somebody to be sympathetic, warm and understanding towards her as well. So we mustn't look on the black side of it completely.
No, but he could be predatory.
Yes,
He could be road dodgy. That's the academic analysis.
And again, going back to children, young people, sort of going back into reality and then the real world, that is often an issue for young people, particularly people who are talking about education and missing education. You know, if they then start leaving school and just truanting from school and then ending up wandering around the local town or something, they could then become very vulnerable. I forget how you describe them, but how
Predatory.
Yeah.
Rather than
Yes. But they could be at risk of that. So for Rebecca, if she was here at NTU now, there'd be quite a lot of potentially things happening for her that could make her being able to finish a course. We don't know what course she's on. I've not actually said what course she's on in the book, but she's on a course. But actually there could be a lot of issues for her in terms of how she's managing, how she's coping with it. So, thinking about Rebecca, what, if she was here, what could the university do to help support her, or support students who are in a similar situation to her? What do you currently have in place to support this community of students? And what could be developed so that additional support can be offered? And maybe just have a talk amongst yourselves, just kind of think about what could be done. Thank you for your time. Are there any other questions? No. Well, thank you very much for your time, for taking up your lunch time to come and listen. And it's something that I am very passionate about, I do feel very strongly about, and I think, you know, especially this is a fabulous opportunity with it being Dying Awareness Week to actually talk about and to get people thinking more about it. Thank you for your time.